And here's the motive. By transferring these assets to the trust, I foresee an improved protection of these funds from any legal claim and liability. A careful analysis by experts has concluded that the funds currently held are sufficient for the long-term use by the Catholic cemeteries. The value of the funds to be transferred was $56,943,000. And it is that letter from Dolan that reflects that a conscious choice is being made, faced with legal suits by courageous survivors, that they are choosing to move the money to avoid accountability. The next document is the Vatican response. And in the first sentence it says, regarding your letter dated June 4, 2007, the congregation can now provide the requested, and that is Latin for no objection. That means permission given to move the money, to hide it, to avoid accountability for the history. The date of this is significant because it's July 18th, 2007. The request had been made on June 4th, 2007. That means it was a little over a month between the request to move the money to the Vatican from Dolan and the permission given. Little over 1 month. That's significant. It's significant because when we contrast the choices they made around child protection and the removal and reporting and the warning of priests, it took them years. In fact, until this day, choices were made to protect their reputation. And we'll contrast that in a moment. The next document is 6289, and these are Finance Committee minutes. And in this committee minute, they're discussing the finances of the Archdiocese. Then Archbishop Dolan presides. And what is demonstrated here is at the second page, the words, "We're currently working on setting up a trust fund to shelter the parish deposit fund." And that means that they are planning to move additional sums, monies in addition to the cemetery trust of $57 million, into the parishes, and this is some $90 million. And why would they be doing that at this particular time? Because they're facing accountability, and the plan is also to keep it from the survivors, and at the same time secretly pay off some of the offenders to get them to quietly go away by petitioning for laicization. And that portion of the plan is reflected at the third page, which would be 6287, if you have that, Stacy. Yep. And at that paragraph, there is discussion of the currently unassignable priests receiving full salaries and budgeted under the vicar for clergy. And there is a discussion of the plan to pay them $20,000, each of these offenders. $10,000 up front, and then $10,000 after they receive progress for removal from the Vatican State. Now, when Archbishop Dolan was publicly confronted with the possibility or the assertion that he had participated in a plan to secretly pay perpetrators, he called that groundless. Let's look at the next one, is reported. And he said publicly that such a thing, such an assertion is groundless and scurrilous in my book, useless and counterproductive. Well, it's documented. It's documented in these documents. And what choices he and they had made is scurrilous. And counterproductive to the safety and well-being of the children. And only productive to the reputation of the preservation of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, the Archdiocese of New York, and the Vatican, and others like them. Now, the next document is an example of payments being made. And we can see on May 12, 2003, this would be 20025, and it pertains to an O'Brien, Father John O'Brien. And before we go to that, it should be noted there are 9 priests, as documented in these files, who are known offenders, to whom payments are being secretly made, all of whom remained in a priest, and some of them known to have posed continued risk. And the first example is O'Brien, 20025. At the 3rd paragraph, in a letter from the vicar for the clergy to O'Brien, it is stated, if a priest elects voluntary laicization, we would offer what has been our practice, if not policy, for more than a decade, namely $10,000 when the petition is submitted and $10,000 when a definitive response is received. Policy, practice, decade long. The next paragraph states John. During this time, the penal process is imposed, and this could last for up to a year. The Archdiocese would be responsible for supporting you to the same extent that a retired priest now receives support, namely $2,500 a month. So they're not only paying them the money, they're continuing to support them and pay benefits. This is on Dolan's watch, and this is a practice that had been employed for at least a decade. Next paragraph, it states at the first sentence in the 2nd page, in all instances, we would maintain you on our health insurance for 1 year at diocesan expense. These are some of the choices being made. And they're more than a choice. It's a pattern and a practice. It's a reputation protection program. It's a perpetrator protection program. At the gravest peril of the children. The next example is it goes back to O'Brien, and it's important to note that O'Brien, as they're paying him this money and keeping these secrets, has been criminally convicted. And the only ones that know that this practice is being employed and has been employed for a decade, and by Dolan and the Vatican, are those top officials. Now, as Dolan and his predecessors petition the Holy See to remove these priests, they continue to keep the risk that they know to be secret. And that risk is reflected in these files. And it's also reflected that the delays, in contrast to the movement of the money that took a little over a month to get approval on, the delays on the removal of the priests from the priesthood are extraordinarily long. In other words, everybody is dragging their feet because it's to their advantage. And the next document is dated September 14th, 2005. And this pertains to a priest by the name of John Wagner. And this is a letter from Archbishop Dolan to the Vatican and Archbishop Amato at the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith. And the records reflect that this offender has admitted to having assaulted minors. And it states, I'm submitting for your consideration the case of a priest of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, Reverend John C. Wagner, and has been accused of sexual assault of minors. Father Wagner has admitted some of the acts of sexual assault occurred. At the second paragraph, at the bottom of it, it states he has not been in compliance with the order to have no supervised contact with minors. In other words, they know he's seeing kids. It states, and Dolan does to the Vatican, with this latest revelation that the teenaged nephew of blank has been spending time with Wagner at his residence for the last few years. It goes on to state, and Archbishop Dolan states to the Vatican, therefore, what are they concerned about here? The liability for the Archdiocese is great, as is the potential for scandal, if it appears that no definitive action has been taken. So the concern is about what? Appearance and secrecy. Where does it say that they've done anything to protect that kid or any of the others? Nowhere in these documents. Nowhere in these records. Nowhere. The second page of this same document reflects not only that this is a known risk, but he is asking that Wagner, and he says, I am asking that Reverend Wagner be dismissed ex officio from the clerical state, and it's dated September 14th, 2005. The next document, knowing that this guy is still a priest, knowing that he's still at risk, knowing that he's still seeing kids, the response from the Vatican 6 months later, this is 40064, the Vatican writes, we need more information, even though they know he's still around kids, even though they know there have been 10 accusations pertaining to this offender. 10. The next document, as this priest is still at risk and a priest with full knowledge of the Archbishop and the Archdiocese officials and the Vatican, it takes them how long to remove them? January 15th, 2008. A letter from Dolan to the Vatican, marked 40048. He states, I am submitting once again for your consideration the case of a priest of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, Reverend John Wagner, who has been accused of multiple counts of sexual abuse of minors. He goes on to state, Father Wagner has admitted that some of acts of sexual assault occurred, but denies other. He now cut off all contact with the representatives of the Archdiocese, so we have no way of confronting him on these additional reports, especially the extremely disturbing one that he may still be in contact with teenage boys. What do? Nothing but remain concerned about their own liability and keeping this secret. He writes, therefore, the liability for the Archdiocese is great, as is the potential for scandal, if it appears that no definitive action has been taken. Pending state legislation to abolish retroactively the statute of limitations will gain more supporters if it appears we are letting these pending cases languish. So now they're not only concerned about having moved money to avoid accountability, they're concerned about scandal, that is letting people know what they've done, but they're concerned about legislation that could actually expose them to accountability if the truth is known. So what they continue to do is hide the truth, hide what they know, so that the legislature will not know, so the parents will not know their kids are at risk, so they made conscious choices to remain in secrecy to keep the kids in grave peril, because the lawmakers did not know what we now know and what's in these documents. They did not change the statute of limitations. So there remains a very narrow window in Wisconsin from which survivors can bring claims. And it's those survivors that did bring a few claims on whose shoulders we stand here today that forced the agreement that led to the release of these documents and these long-held secrets. And it's also significant that it is 1.5 years later that Dolan, in his letter to them, is insisting on his removal. But the removal doesn't come in the exhibit 40067 until 1.5 years later. Actually, they never remove him. He's still a priest. And what we just revealed as one of the Templars, one of the examples of how they're handling this, is just evidence that as of 2008, they have started the administrative process secretly.
So 4 years after Archbishop Dolan had asked the Vatican to get him out, 4 years after the Vatican knew that he was at risk to kids, the Vatican's response at that time is start a process. And to this day, today, John Wagner remains a priest. of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. This man that was accused of molesting 10 kids admitted some of it, and who the Vatican and Cardinal Dolan know is a risk to kids to this very day is still a priest.
And he is one of the 42 that they have listed as credibly accused. But how many kids he has access to this moment in time is still of grave concern to all of us on reading of these documents. The next document is pertains to O'Brien, John O'Brien, and it is 19938. And it is from Archbishop Dolan, dated September 6, 2005. Now, 2 years before this, in 2003, Dolan had wrote to Cardinal Ratzinger's office about O'Brien, 2 years before. And here, he again reminds the Vatican at the first paragraph, as you are aware from the supporting documentation, Father O'Brien was criminally convicted and placed on 18 months probation. At the second paragraph, in the middle he states, it included a police report from 2001 in which an additional allegation of sexual abuse of a minor by Father O'Brien was made. And in that same paragraph, he goes on to state, the sexual contact was reported as beginning when blank, the victim, was 14 and continuing until he turned 18. The bottom of this page, Father then Archbishop Dolan writes, especially troubling. Let's go to the bottom of this page. It's 19938.
The whole, Stacy, the one you have up, the whole bottom paragraph. Please pull that up. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. The last sentence states, especially troubling was the report that Father O'Brien has been observed on a number of occasions in the local library with adolescent boys. What do they do with this besides report it to the Vatican and keep it to themselves? Nothing. Next paragraph, Archbishop Dolan writes to the Vatican, obviously efforts at monitoring him are not successful, so they know that he can't control himself. And they know they're the only ones that can control him or prevent him from hurting others by doing what? Warning the public, warning the parishioners, removing him and exposing him, but instead they do not warn the unwary, and the offender continues in a position and at risk. Archbishop Dolan writes at the second to the last paragraph, the potential for great scandal exists. You see that word throughout. If Father O'Brien, while still in the clerical state, makes any inappropriate advances on any of these adolescent boys in whose company he has been observed, the outcry will be huge. The scandal lies not in the laicization, but in the perception the church has not acted expeditiously enough, knowing the multiple reports of abuse. So what are they thinking about? And who are they thinking about? Their reputation, the avoidance of scandal. These are Dolan's words to the Vatican. these are the Archdiocese priorities that they have placed on the entire operation. And these priorities are demonstrated throughout by Dolan and his predecessors. And the peril remains great and in real time. We have the Vatican response. And this is a convicted offender who they know at risk, and the Vatican response is the petition addressed to the Holy Father should contain at least an admission of guilt and a sincere expression of remorse. So they delay this further, waiting for an expression of remorse. The guy's been convicted, they know he's at risk, and they still wait. They still delay, and they still drag. And the next document, which is 39818, is the actual removal. And it's dated April 3rd, 2009. In other words, it took 5.5 years of this offender, who is known to have been criminally convicted, who is known to them to be at risk and currently at risk, to remove. And when they did remove, they did what? Kept that secret and has not been known until the release of this stuff.
What's the difference between Wagner, he had 7.5+ years, and Brian 5.5?
Now,
That movement and money.
when you contrast the movement of the money and the quick decision to enable them to move the money within a month or a month and a half, to Wagner, who it took 7.5 years for them to remove and react to, and O'Brien, who took 5.5 years, you get a real sense of the priorities that are demonstrated not only in these documents but by the choices made. The next set of documents is 24131, and this pertains to an offender whose deposition we took, Budzinski, Budzynski. We took the depositions of Weekland, Budzinski, Skelba, who had been auxiliary bishop and in leadership in the Archdiocese for decades, both under Dolan, Weekland, and predecessors, and also Archbishop Dolan. And the Budzinski case, and what is revealed in the documents and in the deposition, is another example of the choices made and the priorities established that are not so alarming and disturbing and frankly so scary. For in this document we see that the letter to Cardinal Ratzinger in 2003 from Dolan is a request for his removal, and he states at the first paragraph, he has been accused of sexual abuse of minors. The summary of these allegations is enclosed. Father Budzinski has admitted that multiple acts of sexual assault occurred. That summary is attached, and in those attachments, 24133 through 24145, there is detailed accounts of the multiple criminal sexual acts both admitted to and uncontested by this offender. And there are 30 kids documented to have been admitted to having offended by this offender, and in these documents, 30 that he admitted to, more that he had even been accused of. And in this document at the second page, and in Dolan's own words, again, we see the priorities. He states to Cardinal Ratzinger, as victims organize and become more public, the potential for true scandal is very real. At the second paragraph, he asks, I am asking that Reverend Baczynski be dismissed ex officio from the clerical state. And the Vatican response to this is 23858. And in it, we see that there again is delay, and they are asking for the documentation be submitted. There remains some confusion as to the actual ages of the victims of the alleged abuse. It is not clear, for example, from the table you submitted, whether the age of the victims as reference to their age in 1994 or 2003. And if you look at those pages of documents where he's admitted to 30, and there are dozens more that are detailed vividly and disgustingly, you see what the attitude is reflected by the top leadership here. And so the real risk to the kids is ignored and continues to be delayed. And it's not until Exhibit 24168, another year later, that he is actually removed. And so, as we look at the documents that we have now posted at AndersonAdvocates.com, we look at the courage of the survivors who have come forward and demanded and required the exposure and disclosure of these documents before there could be any closure, and their courage. And we applaud that courage in now the revelations that are revealed, that are both shameful, that are shocking, but moreover they're scary, because they demonstrate a pattern in practice decades long from the past into the present. We see a sense of cowardness among the clerics at the top, that's contrasted to the courage of the survivors who at grave risk disclosed the secret, shared it, and demanded exposure and closure, and would not allow their silence to be bought, and would not relent. And who have sought not only a change in public policy in Wisconsin regarding statute limitations, but demanded and ultimately reached an agreement where these documents would be disclosed. And first and foremost comes in their mind and in our hearts the protection of the kids. And it is for those kids who have and remained at risk by all these practices, they want protected first. And from the shame and from the scandal that is reflected in these documents, we take great heart in the courage of these survivors who demanded this disclosure and this exposure, because until there is a full airing of the past, the kids remain a grave peril in the future. And to each of the courageous survivors with whom we're working here in Milwaukee and on this disclosure piece, 350 with whom we're working, and a total of 575 that have come forward. We praise for their courage, and we speak very sadly about what is revealed here. There is no joy. There is nothing but deep, dark secrets that have been long kept by some of the most powerful and trusted among us, from the Vatican to the archbishops, Dolan, Weakland, Cousins, Myers, Skelba, and all their lieutenants who made choices. These survivors chose to stand up against them. And it is to those survivors we express our gratitude, because it is they have made the choice to protect the kids in the future by revealing the past. The good news is some of this past has now been revealed. The bad news is that this is only a partial revelation, and the work continues, and the journey continues. And this reflects only 42 of those credibly accused offenders. There are dozens and countless other offenders, religious priests, those not listed as credibly accused by the Archdiocese. That means that they don't believe the victim's report, or they've made their own determination that they're not worthy of having been believed, that are not included in this. And there are some yet to be revealed. So the process of revolution, of exposure and disclosure continues. The good news is that the survivors had the courage to call the bluff and call them out, and we're grateful to stand with them. Questions?
One clarification before I was emailed during this press conference that John Wagner may have been recently laicized. If he was, that's news to me. But up until very recently, for 7+ years, he remained a priest.
Yeah, if John Wagner actually now has been removed, the documents that we got did not reflect that, so we stand corrected if that's the case.
The other big thing that Jeff touched on as well is that what these documents show and what they lead to is an opportunity for this Vatican and Pope Francis to come clean about the secrets that he has and the Vatican has on perpetrators worldwide. Each diocese here in Minnesota, each bishop here in Minnesota has files just like this that they're keeping secret, the names that they're keeping secret, and we're calling on, together with these courageous survivors, calling on Pope Francis and all the bishops worldwide to come clean with these secrets.
And the reality is that these documents and these files that have now been disgorged are required to be kept by the Vatican, by every bishop in the world, by every religious superior in the world. And this is just a glimpse, this is just a peek into one of the dioceses, into part of the practices that are required to be kept and adhered to obediently and secretly by the Vatican. And there are 177 dioceses in the U.S. and over 100 religious orders required to employ these very same practices, required by the Vatican, and strictly adhered to by the leaders, from Dolan and every other cardinal, every archbishop, every bishop, and every top-ranking official, and that is strict adherence to secrecy. So this is really an exhortation to the bishops and to the leaders and to the Vatican worldwide to come clean. And from that, we can then know that the children will be protected. And from the secrets of the past and the lightness that they can be put on the darkness through truth, we can then know that the children are better protected, and the healing can begin, and there can be closure, because until there is full exposure and disclosure from the Vatican on down, there can be no closure. And we cannot rest, and we will not, nor will the survivors on whose shoulders we stand in deep gratitude for what they've accomplished today. Anything else?
Questions?
What was your experience with Cardinal Dolan during his deposition? Did you find him forthcoming?
Our experience with Cardinal Dolan in his deposition was that he demonstrated the same attitude of his predecessors and other bishops, archbishops, and cardinals that we have deposed similarly in the last 29 years. And that was deny, minimize, and blame. First, he denied that he and they had engaged in the practice of secrecy and to avoid scandal. Second, when confronted with it, he minimized the significance of it, that they didn't have enough information, or just like an offender minimizes his offenses, he did the same thing, minimization. And then finally, he blamed, and he had a tendency to blame the media, or to blame us, or to blame others for saying or asserting that nothing significant has changed. And so the attitude that we have seen demonstrated, and largely by the hierarchs, is the same attitude demonstrated by offenders. That is, they do not acknowledge the serious source of their own problems, and they deny that they have engaged in serious misconduct. And that is what I think was demonstrated in his deposition. And while there's no doubt that he and others like him do good work, there's no doubt that what we see demonstrated here in all of these depositions is a noble cause corruption. And that is, they do this noble work, and they think in the name of this noble work, they must keep these secrets, they must protect themselves in order to do that work. And why would such good men who want to do such good work adhere to such a code? And the reason they do is they're required to obey the Holy Father, that is the Vatican, and they're required to keep secrets. And they're required to take both an oath of obedience and an oath of secrecy. And it is in that culture, the clerical culture, that sexual abuse has thrived in darkness and in secrecy. And now disclosures like this bring a little light to that.